The courtroom doors swung open at 9:16 in the morning, and the sound of heavy oak slamming against its frame echoed through the nearly empty gallery like a judge's gavel striking down a sentence. Sofia Morgan stood there, breathing visible in the dry cold of the October air, her hands trembling so violently she could barely grip the subpoena crumpled in her fingers. 27 years old, but the bruises mapped across her ribs and spine had stolen a decade from her face. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it stretched the hollow skin at her temples. She wore a thin black cardigan over her waitressing uniform because those were the only two pieces of clothing in her apartment that did not smell like grease and desperation. The uniform underneath bore the permanent coffee stains of 12-hour shifts and tips that never came. $34. That was all the money in her pocket. A foreclosure notice was crumpled in her purse, dated 3 weeks earlier, with a deadline that was now less than 4 days away. She moved to the defendant's table. Alone. No lawyer. No one had answered when she called the legal aid office. No one cared about a waitress accused of stealing from a man who still had cops in his back pocket and a smile that promised he could destroy her whenever he chose. The bailiff called the case. Douglas Hale stood from the plaintiff's table, and the courtroom shifted with his movement. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray, Italian-tailored, worth more than everything Sofia owned. His hair was perfectly styled. His teeth were perfectly white. When he smiled at the judge, his eyes remained empty, like a blade wrapped in ice. 2 police officers sat directly behind him, the same 2 who had looked away 3 nights ago when he broke 3 of her ribs. They looked away now too. Sofia could feel her body remembering. The pain in her ribs. The way she could not draw a full breath. The way his voice sounded when he told her no one would ever believe her. Then the rear courtroom doors opened again. Every single head turned. The bailiff froze mid-sentence. The judge's pen stopped moving. The 2 police officers straightened in their seats, and something that looked like fear flickered across their faces. Luca Castellano walked through those doors like a man who owned the building, the city, perhaps the sky itself. 6'3", muscular in the way that came from decades of violence and survival, not from a gym membership. His suit was black and perfectly tailored, hand-stitched, worth more than Sofia's yearly rent. His shirt was white and unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the muscled expanse of his chest. His dark eyes missed absolutely nothing. They swept the courtroom, catalogued every face, every reaction, and then locked onto Sofia with an intensity that made her breath catch. Enzo and Theo flanked him, identically dressed, identically dangerous, their hands resting at their sides with the casual confidence of men who had used violence so many times it had become second nature. They moved with him as he took a seat in the back row, and not a single person in that courtroom made a sound. Douglas's smirk faltered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Sofia to see the fear replace it. The judge sat up straighter in his chair, his authority suddenly and completely insufficient for what had just entered his courtroom. Luca's eyes never left Sofia's face. He watched her trembling hands. He watched her try to breathe. He watched the bruised wrist she was trying to hide by pulling her sleeve lower. He watched her jaw clench against the pain in her ribs. He watched everything. His expression did not change. But something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, and in that moment, the decision had already been made. Douglas Hale would be destroyed. Completely. Systematically. Without mercy. But Sofia did not know that. She did not know who this man was. She did not know that in the next 72 hours, her entire world would splinter and rebuild. She knew only that there was a stranger in the courtroom, and his presence had changed everything, and her heart was beating so fast she thought she might collapse. The judge cleared his throat. "Let us proceed," he said quietly, his voice lacking the authority it had carried only moments before. "Mr. Hale, you are alleging that the defendant stole approximately $3,000 from you. Is that correct?" Douglas stood. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, the voice of a man who had done this before. "Yes, Your Honor. I trusted her. I gave her access to my apartment, my things, and she repaid that trust by stealing from me. I have a witness statement from my neighbor who saw her carrying a bag from my residence on the night in question. I have bank records showing the $3,000 disappeared from my account on that same evening. I am asking for restitution and for her arrest on charges of grand larceny. Every word was a lie wrapped in the confidence of someone who believed no one would question him. Because no one ever had. Sofia's hands shook harder. She tried to stand, but her legs would not support her. She gripped the table instead. Her voice came out barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind, like something about to be extinguished. I did not steal anything. I was at the diner that night. 12 hours. Double shift. 23 people sat at my tables. I have receipts. I have timestamps. I can name every single customer if you give me a moment to think. I was not in his apartment. I have not been in his apartment in 8 months, since I finally found the courage to leave him. The judge looked at Douglas. Do you have evidence placing her in your residence on the date in question? My neighbor's statement, Douglas said smoothly. Which is more credible than hers? She is desperate. She is lying to escape the consequences of her theft. Behind him, the two police officers nodded slightly, in perfect synchronization, like marionettes on identical strings. Luca rose from his seat in the back row. His movement was slow, deliberate, controlled. Every eye in the courtroom shifted to him. He walked forward, his footsteps silent on the marble floor, moving like a general surveying a battlefield, and he placed a hand gently on Sofia's trembling shoulder. The touch lasted only a moment. It lasted an eternity. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath, like thunder rolling across an empty sky. The defendant was at the San Francisco diner on the evening in question. She was working. I know this because I checked the security footage myself. There are time-stamped images showing her serving customers for the duration of the evening in question. There are credit card receipts, bearing the diner's name and date, from each of her 12 tables. There is no evidence placing her in Mr. Hale's residence. What there is, however, is evidence that Mr. Hale has filed false charges against this woman as a form of control and intimidation. I am prepared to present all of this evidence to the police department, the FBI, and the district attorney's office within the next 3 hours. I am also prepared to present evidence of assault, domestic violence, harassment, and threats. His hand rested on Sofia's shoulder the entire time he spoke. She could feel it there, steady, immovable, like an anchor in a storm. Douglas's face drained of color. The two police officers stood abruptly and left the courtroom without a word. The judge looked between Douglas and Luca, and the power dynamic in the room shifted so completely that it was almost visible, like the moment just before a storm breaks. Case dismissed, the judge said quietly. I am also recommending that Mr. Hale be investigated by the police department for filing a false report. Mr. Castellano, please do submit your evidence. Bailiff, we are adjourned. The gavel struck down, and the sound of it echoed through the courtroom like the closing of a door that would never open again. Sofia stood there, trembling, as the courtroom emptied around her. Luca's hand remained on her shoulder. When she finally looked up at him, she saw something in his dark eyes that she did not understand. Something that looked like recognition. Something that looked like rage held back by nothing but willpower. What is your name? He asked quietly. Sofia Morgan, she whispered. He nodded once, slowly, as if he was committing something to memory. Something important. Something that would change everything. Sofia, he said, and the way he said it, with such care, such weight, made it sound like a prayer. You need a lawyer. You need a place to stay. You need someone to make sure this man never comes near you again. I am offering all of those things. No cost. No obligation. Just safety. Do you understand? She stared at him. She did not understand anything about this moment. She did not understand why a man who looked like he had stepped out of a nightmare would offer her protection. She did not understand why she believed him completely. I do not have anyone, she said. Her voice was breaking now. I have $34 and a foreclosure notice and nowhere to go. You have me now, Luca said. That is enough. Enzo and Theo appeared at the courtroom doors, waiting. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the gold on Luca's wrist, a watch that cost more than Sofia's annual rent, and for the first time in 8 years, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope. She was too broken for hope. But the beginning of something. The smallest seed of possibility that her life might not be over. That someone might see her as something other than invisible. She took his hand, and he led her out of the courtroom into the October cold. 3 weeks before Sofia Morgan stood in that courtroom with her hand trembling in Luca Castellano's grip, she was fighting for her life on Highway 101 in a different kind of darkness. October 23, 11:34 p.m. The night was the kind of cold that cuts through broken things and finds their weakest points. Sofia sat behind the wheel of her 1998 Honda Civic, watching the needle on her fuel gauge hover between empty and something worse. The heater had stopped working in August. The windshield wipers squeaked against the fog rolling in thick from the bay, and the sound was the only thing keeping her awake after a 16-hour shift waiting tables at a diner where the coffee was always burned and the tips were always less than the kindness required to serve. She turned the key. The engine made a sound like a man choking. Click. Silence. Click. Nothing. 6 times she tried. 6 times the car refused to start. By the 7th attempt, she understood that this was not a mechanical failure. This was the universe telling her what it had been telling her for 8 years: you are not meant to survive this. The foreclosure notice sat on the passenger seat beside her, curled at the edges from where she had clutched it in both hands that morning. $35,000 in 3 days, or the studio apartment would no longer be hers. The apartment was 700 square feet in the Tenderloin, the kind of place where the walls sweated and the neighbors screamed and the radiator clanked like a living thing struggling to breathe. She had saved that rent money for years by cleaning houses on weekends, by skipping meals, by wearing the same jacket through 3 winters. She had $34 left in her bank account. Not 34,000. 34. She sat in the dark for 20 minutes, and the fog pressed against the windows like something trying to get in. Her breath came out in visible clouds. Her hands shook so hard she had to grip them together to keep them still. She could not call for help because Douglas monitored her phone bill. He called every number she dialed and demanded explanations. He said it was love. He said it was protection. He said she belonged to him, and belongings do not get to have secrets. Then the headlights came. Not the headlights of a single car. A convoy. 3 black SUVs, windows tinted so dark you could not see the faces of the people inside, moving down Highway 101 like something predatory and certain. They slowed as they approached her disabled car. The fog swallowed them for a moment, then spit them back out, pulling alongside her on the shoulder. Sofia's heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape her body. This was how women disappeared. She had read the stories. She knew the statistics. A broken car at midnight on a foggy highway. A woman alone. Men in vehicles with tinted windows and no mercy written across their foreheads. She locked the doors. The rear door of the middle SUV opened. A man stepped out. Tall. 6'2", maybe 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block out the fog itself. His coat was black cashmere, the kind of garment that cost more than Sofia's monthly rent, and underneath it she caught the shape of something that might have been muscle or might have been the weight of things he had done. His hair was dark and swept back from a face that looked carved from stone. He had scars. One ran from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone like someone had tried to split him open and he had simply decided to let them. His eyes were the color of a sky before a storm, and when he looked at her through the windshield, Sofia felt something primal whisper inside her chest, "This man is dangerous." He walked to her window with the kind of deliberate pace that suggested he had never had to hurry for anything in his life. She cracked the window 2 inches. His voice was quiet. Controlled. The kind of voice that did not need to be loud because everything inside a 3-block radius was already listening. You need help. Not a question. A statement. A fact he had already processed and decided upon before his feet hit the asphalt. Sofia's voice came out smaller than she intended. A tow truck is coming. He looked at the fog. Then at her. Then at the highway stretching empty in both directions. In this fog. At midnight. On a Friday night when every tow truck in San Francisco is already deployed. He paused. The wind howled. How long have you been waiting? 20 minutes, she admitted. He turned to the men standing at the rear of the first SUV. One was older, maybe 50, with silver at his temples and a face that suggested he had seen everything and approved of nothing. The other was younger, built like someone who broke things for a living. Enzo, the man at her window said, "Call Marco's garage. Tell him the car is a 1998 Civic on Highway 101 northbound, and tell him I said fix it today. Bill me." Then to the younger man, "Theo, drive her home." Sofia felt something rise in her throat. "I can't. I don't owe anyone. I can't owe." "You do not owe me," he said. His eyes found hers through the crack in the window, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. "You are not safe here. Look at the fog. Look at the hour. Consider it a favor extended to someone who needs one, with no strings attached to it. Do you understand?" What she did not know was that Luca Castellano had noticed the finger-shaped bruises on her wrist when she had gripped the window frame. He had seen the way she flinched when his hand moved too quickly toward the glass. He had seen that terror before, in a different century, in a different woman's eyes when his father came home drunk with violence in his pockets and death in his hands. He had sworn then, as a boy watching his mother flinch, that no woman would ever shake like that in front of him without him burning the world down to stop it. Sofia looked at his face. At the scar. At the coat that cost more than everything she owned. At the men standing motionless in the fog, waiting for his orders like soldiers in an army she did not understand existed. Every instinct she had screamed at her to refuse. Every survival mechanism in her body told her that accepting help from men like this was how women ended up in unmarked graves. But she had nowhere else to go. "Okay," she whispered. Theo opened the passenger door. She grabbed the foreclosure notice and the remains of her dignity and stepped out into the October cold. The fog wrapped around her like something wet and suffocating. She could not see more than 3 feet in any direction. It was like the world had been erased and only this small circle of black asphalt existed anymore. The second SUV was warm. Clean. There was a bottle of water in the cup holder and a blanket on the back seat. Theo did not speak as he drove. The radio played something classical. Violins. Luca Castellano did not listen to hip-hop or pop or any music that suggested joy was still possible in the world. He listened to composers who understood suffering and had spent their lives trying to put it into sound. Sofia fell asleep against the window. She woke when the car slowed outside her building in the Tenderloin, that neighborhood where desperation lived in the corners and hope came to die quietly. The building was for stories of crumbling brick and windows that looked like eyes that had seen too much. A neon sign from a pawn shop across the street cast everything in a sick pink light. Theo reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card. It was thick stock, cream-colored, with one word embossed in silver, Castellano. "If you need anything," Theo said quietly, "call this number." "He said to tell you that." Sofia took the card. Her fingers trembled. "I don't even know his name." "You do now," Theo said. "And more importantly, he knows yours." She stepped out of the SUV. The door closed with the kind of sound that suggested weight and finality. The taillights disappeared into the fog. She stood on the sidewalk holding a business card that felt like it was burning a hole in her palm, and somewhere 3 blocks away, in a penthouse office overlooking the entire city, Luca Castellano was making a phone call that would change the course of both their lives. "Marco," he said when the garage owner answered, "there is a 1998 Civic coming to you tomorrow. A woman named Sofia Morgan owns it. Fix it properly. Do not short her on anything. And Marco, he paused, his voice dropping lower, if you ever tell anyone I sent that car to you, I will know about it before the words leave your mouth. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Marco said. Good, Luca said. And he hung up the phone. But what changed everything was what happened 3 days later, when Douglas Hale decided he needed to know where Sofia had been on that Friday night. 3 days had passed since Sofia Morgan climbed the marble steps of the Castelliano mansion for the first time, and her hand still trembled when she thought about what she had left behind. The studio apartment in the Tenderloin was gone now, not just lost, but erased from her life like a nightmare that finally released its grip. She had packed everything she owned into 2 garbage bags and a cardboard box held together with duct tape. The box fit in the back of Theo's SUV without taking up much space. Her new room on the 3rd floor of the mansion was smaller than the closet she used to sleep in, but it had something that made her cry when she was alone in the dark. A lock on the inside of the door. A lock she controlled. That first morning, Luca had handed her the uniform still in dry cleaner plastic and walked away without waiting for her response. Black and white. Simple cotton. The kind of clothes that made you invisible. Sofia changed in her room, smoothing the fabric down over her hips, checking herself in the mirror. A ghost stared back at her. A ghost with hollow eyes and hair she had not washed properly in weeks. By the afternoon of her 3rd day, she had already mapped every room on the 1st and 2nd floors. 114 marble tiles in the foyer alone. She knew this because she had counted them while scrubbing, her hands moving in circles, her mind going somewhere quiet and safe. The kitchen was stainless steel and granite, with appliances that probably cost more than her entire life before this. She had learned not to touch anything unless instructed. The head cook, a woman named Rosa who moved through the kitchen like a general surveying a battlefield, had shown her the supply closet and pointed to a shelf. Here is your cleaning supplies. You touch nothing else. You speak to no one. You keep moving. Understood? Sofia had nodded. Rosa had not smiled. By the time evening came on that 3rd day, Sofia's back ached in a way that felt almost familiar. The pain of work. The pain of being needed for something besides warmth and compliance. She was polishing the banister on the grand staircase when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She should not have answered it. Household rules stated she was to keep her personal life separate, invisible, irrelevant. But her finger moved before her mind could stop it. Unknown number. She almost did not answer. Sofia Morgan. A man's voice, measured and calm, professional in a way that suggested suits and conference rooms. Yes? Her voice came out barely a whisper. My name is Enzo Rossi. I work for Luca Castelliano. He has been informed of your current employment situation and has a proposal. Are you interested in hearing it? Her stomach dropped. Had she done something wrong? Was she being fired? She looked down at her cleaning supplies, at the half-polished banister stretching down below her. What kind of proposal? She asked. The housekeeper position here at the mansion. The previous employee quit unexpectedly. Mr. Castelliano needs someone to start immediately. Room and board included, plus salary. Full-time position. Are you interested? Sofia's mind moved slowly, like it was wading through water. She was already working here. She was already living here. Already invisible. I thought I already had a job. Cleaning. This is a different position, Enzo said carefully. More responsibility. Better pay. For times what you are currently making. $800 per week. You would have your own room, your own space, 3 meals per day provided. No shared facilities. No questions asked about your background or your circumstances. $800 per week. The foreclosure notice had demanded $35,000 in 3 days. She did not have 3 days anymore. The notice was dated. The deadline had passed 2 days ago. She did not know what happened when a deadline passed, when the number became real and the threat became action. She only knew that she was running out of time the way a person runs out of oxygen. "Yes," she said, before her fear could catch up with her. "Yes, I am interested." "Good," Enzo said. His voice carried something that sounded almost like approval. "Theo will collect you at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He will take you to the mansion to meet Mr. Castellano. Bring everything you own. You will not be returning to your current residence." The line went dead. Sofia stood on the staircase, the polishing cloth still in her hand, and tried to understand what had just happened. She had a job. She had a room. She had $800 per week, which meant in 44 weeks she could have $35,000. Except the deadline had already passed. She did not ask how Luca Castellano had known she needed help. She did not question why a stranger would offer her 4 times the pay for work she was already doing. Instead, she finished polishing the banister, her movements mechanical and smooth, and she climbed the narrow service stairs to her old room to pack the garbage bags that contained everything she possessed. The mansion at Pacific Heights rose from the street like something that belonged to another world entirely. 3 stories of white stone with iron gates and a circular driveway where a fountain sprayed water so clear it looked like liquid diamonds in the afternoon light. Sofia's hand shook as Theo guided her through the front door, through the foyer with its 114 tiles, past oil paintings in gold frames that probably cost more than the apartment building where she used to live. Luca was waiting in his office, behind a desk made of dark wood that gleamed like black glass. He did not stand when she entered. He simply looked at her with eyes that were grey and flat and completely unreadable. "Sofia Morgan," he said. Her name in his mouth sounded different, formal, like it was the name of someone real. Someone who mattered. "Enzo tells me you have accepted the position." She nodded. He slid a folder across the desk. "Your employment contract. Standard terms. You report to Enzo. You clean the mansion, you maintain the household, you ask no questions about visitors or business. In exchange, you receive $800 per week, room and board, and complete privacy in your personal space. No one enters your room without permission. Not me, not anyone. This is non-negotiable. A non-negotiable lock on her room. On her life. On her safety." "I understand," she said. "Do you have questions?" He was already closing the folder, already preparing to dismiss her. But something in his tone was not dismissive. It was clear. It was offering her the option to speak. "No," she whispered. "No questions." He nodded once. "Enzo will show you to your quarters. You start tomorrow at 6 in the morning." She turned to leave, then stopped. Something made her turn back. Some instinct that told her she would not get another chance to ask this. "Why?" The word came out before she could stop it. "Why would you do this?" Luca did not answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment something flickered across his face, something like recognition, like memory, like pain. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "Because 8 years ago, I could have prevented a woman I loved from suffering. I did not." He paused. His knuckles were white on the armrests of his chair. "I will not make that mistake again." Sofia felt the weight of those words land inside her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She nodded, and then she left before she could cry, before he could see the tears that suddenly burned her eyes. The room Enzo showed her was on the 3rd floor, small and clean, with a lock on the inside of the door. That night, alone in the darkness, Sofia Morgan pulled the deadbolt home and let herself weep for the first time in months. Not sad tears. Not the tears of someone giving up. These were different. These were the tears of someone who had been let down so many times that kindness had become almost unrecognizable, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. She slept in a real bed for the first time in half a year. The mattress was soft. The sheet smelled like lavender. Outside her window, the fog rolled over the city in waves, thick and protective, hiding everything, keeping the world at bay. But what she did not know was that somewhere in his penthouse office 3 blocks away, Luca Castellano was making a phone call that would set events in motion like dominoes aligned in the dark, each one waiting to fall. "Marco," he said when the voice answered. "There is a 1998 Civic. The owner is Sofia Morgan. She brings it to you tomorrow. Fix it properly. Everything. Transmission, engine, suspension. Do not give her an estimate. Just fix it." And Marco, his voice dropped, became something sharp and dangerous. "If you ever tell anyone I sent her to you, I will know about it before the words leave your mouth. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Marco said quietly. "Good," Luca said. And he hung up the phone. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Douglas Hale's breathing, heavy and triumphant, like a predator standing over wounded prey. Sofia Morgan sat at the defendant's table with her hands folded so tightly her fingernails cut crescents into her palms. The foreclosure notice she had carried for 3 months was no longer in her pocket. It was in a manila folder on the judge's bench. 14 days. That was all she had left before the apartment would no longer be hers. Douglas smiled across the aisle, and in that smile lived 8 years of cruelty distilled into a single expression of absolute control. His lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client is seeking damages for theft. $8,000, stolen during an intimate relationship and never returned. The defendant has no witnesses, no documentation, no defense. We request the court rule in favor of my client and order immediate restitution." $8,000. Sofia did not have 8,000 cents. She had $34. 34. The judge looked at her. "You may respond to the charges." Sofia stood. Her legs were unsteady. The courtroom tilted slightly, but she gripped the table's edge and spoke. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to, barely a whisper above the sound of her own heartbeat. "I never took anything from him. He's doing this because I left him. Because I would not let him hurt me anymore. And now he's using the law to hurt me instead." Douglas laughed. Actually laughed, a sound like broken glass dragged across concrete. One of the 2 uniformed officers sitting behind him muttered something under his breath. A snicker followed. The judge's expression remained unmoved, skeptical, like a man watching someone spin a transparent lie. This was the moment Sofia felt something inside her break. Not shatter. Something deeper than that. A collapse. The feeling of a door closing on a house she would never live in, a life she would never have, a future that was slipping away in real time while a courtroom full of strangers watched her lose everything. Then the rear doors opened. The sound was deliberate, controlled, the kind of sound a door makes when someone is not rushing. 3 figures in dark jackets with FBI emblazoned across the back moved into the courtroom with the precision of men who had done this before. The woman leading them was in her 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a braid so tight it seemed to stretch her face. Special Agent Reeves. She carried herself like someone who had walked into courtrooms and demolished men for a living. She approached the bench. The judge straightened, confused. "Your Honor," Agent Reeves said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade through silk, "we need to pause this proceeding. Douglas Hale is the subject of an active federal investigation for racketeering, bribery of public officials, money laundering, and conspiracy. We have a warrant for his arrest." The courtroom erupted. Chairs scraped backward. Whispers became shouts. Douglas's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, his face flushed red, but Agent Reeves did not even look at him. She nodded to 2 agents positioned by the side wall. They moved toward Douglas with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. Douglas tried to stand, tried to run, actually bolted toward the side exit like a man fleeing from fire. One agent caught him before he made 3 steps, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall with enough force to knock the air from his lungs. The second agent pulled his arms behind his back. Handcuffs clicked into place. "This is a setup," Douglas was screaming now, his voice cracking like old wood. "This is a goddamn setup. Who did this? Who?" His eyes found the back of the courtroom. Luca Castelliano sat motionless in the last row, hands folded in his lap, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sofia's entire apartment building, a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar revealing the edge of a scar that ran from his collarbone toward his heart. He did not move. Did not smile. Did not blink. He simply watched, with the patient expression of a man who had stood in courtrooms before and understood the mathematics of consequence. Douglas's face went bone white. No. No, you don't understand. Miranda rights, one of the agents said, and began to recite them in a voice so practiced it sounded almost musical. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Douglas was dragged from the courtroom, still screaming, still fighting, his shoes scraping across the polished floor, leaving marks like a man being pulled from a burning building. The sound of his voice echoed down the hallway and then faded, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the thundering silence of shock. Agent Reeves turned to face the two uniformed officers who had walked in with Douglas, the ones who had been his friends, his allies, the ones who had looked away from Sofia's bruises for 8 years. Officers Brennan and Cruz, Reeves said, and even her pronunciation of their names sounded like a death sentence. We will also be investigating you for obstruction of justice, accepting bribes to ignore domestic violence reports, and conspiracy to cover up a crime. Do not leave the state. The officers looked at each other. One of them actually stood up and walked out of the courtroom without waiting for dismissal, his face the color of concrete. The other followed, moving like a man in a dream. The judge cleared his throat. Case dismissed, he said quietly. Then he looked directly at Sofia. Miss Morgan, the court apologizes for the time you have spent here. You are free to go. Free to go. The words did not make sense at first. Sofia stood frozen, her hand still gripping the table's edge, as if letting go would cause her to float away entirely. She looked back. Luca was still watching her. Still motionless. Still absolute. 2 days earlier, Sofia had stood on the mansion's balcony on the 3rd floor, rain beginning to fall in October cold so sharp it felt like punishment with every breath. She had been living in Luca's house for 2 months. Safe. Federation warm. Paid $50 an hour to clean, though she knew the real payment was something else entirely. It was the absence of fear, the certainty that nothing bad would happen to her in these rooms guarded by men in black suits. But Douglas was still out there. Still texting her phone, messages that ranged from pleading to vicious. Baby, come home. I miss you. I was wrong. Then, hours later, you're a whore. No one else will ever want you. I'm going to destroy you. He had come to the mansion gates 3 times. Each time, Enzo had turned him away without a word, without violence, just a closed gate and silence. But Sofia knew it would not last. She had learned over 8 years that men like Douglas did not simply go away. They waited. They plotted. They found new angles. The rain was soaking through her nightshirt, cold and heavy, and for the first time in 2 months, Sofia had felt the exhaustion of running catch up to her. Not just physical exhaustion. The kind that lived in the bone, the kind that made you consider whether fighting was even worth the effort anymore. She had gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white, and she had thought about how easy it would be to simply let go. To stop fighting. To accept that some people were meant to lose, meant to be broken, meant to live their entire lives waiting for the next blow to fall. Then she heard the balcony door open behind her. Luca was barefoot, wearing only dark sweatpants and a simple t-shirt that showed the full extent of his muscular build, a body that looked like it had been carved from marble by someone who understood violence intimately. His eyes were soft in a way she had never seen them before, soft with something that was not quite anger but was not quite compassion either. It was something in between. Protection. Raw, unyielding protection. He did not ask questions. He simply removed his coat, cashmere, expensive beyond measure, and draped it over her shoulders. Then he stood beside her in the rain, not touching her, just present. Just standing in the cold with her while the city lights blurred behind sheets of water. 2 more days, he said finally, his voice like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Trust me. Something in those words, something in the absolute certainty of his tone, had pulled her back from the edge of that railing. She had nodded, and he had walked her back inside, back to the warmth, back to the illusion that tomorrow might be different. And it had been. 3 days later, Douglas Hale was arrested at dawn. The raid had happened at 6:06 a.m. 12 FBI agents in tactical gear descended on his apartment in coordinated silence, each movement a prayer offered to efficiency. The battering ram hit his door and the wood splintered like kindling. Douglas was dragged from his bed in his underwear, his body thin and pale under the fluorescent lights, slammed to the floor with enough force to knock the wind from him. Handcuffs. Screaming. The sound of his apartment being torn apart by federal agents searching for evidence. They found everything. Records of bribes to 4 different police officers, each bribe documented with amounts and dates and the names of the officers written out in Douglas's own handwriting, stupidity and arrogance intertwined. A folder containing photographs of Sofia taken without her knowledge, Sofia walking to work, Sofia at the grocery store, Sofia unaware that she was being hunted. Financial records showing he had stolen $240,000 from his employer over 4 years. A journal documenting his abuse of Sofia in his own words, like a man proud of his cruelty, documenting it the way a collector documents a prize. The raid was filmed by news helicopters circling overhead. By 8 a.m., Douglas Hale's face was on every news channel, his name a hashtag spreading across the internet like a virus, his shame viral and permanent and absolutely unstoppable. But Douglas Hale's destruction was only half the story. Margaret Harrington made her mistake 2 days after his arrest. She called Sofia's new phone, the one Luca's people had given her with a private number, and left a voicemail. Her voice was dripping with venom so concentrated it seemed to poison the air. You think you have won, you little gold digger? Luca will throw you away like trash when he is bored. You will be back where you started, on your knees, begging for scraps. Margaret did not know that Luca's forensic accountant had already spent 3 months examining her finances. Did not know that they had found the embezzlement. $180,000 siphoned from the children's charity she chaired, money meant for sick kids redirected into offshore accounts bearing Margaret's name. Luca did not have her arrested. He did something far more efficient. He leaked everything to the society pages, to every donor on her charity's board, to the IRS, to journalists who had been looking for a story like this their entire careers. Within a week, Margaret Harrington's life had collapsed in public. Front page news. Her board position stripped. Lawsuits from every direction. Her social standing, carefully constructed over decades, dismantled in 10 days. She called Luca, begging him to make it stop, her voice unraveling like an old sweater. You humiliated someone under my protection, he said, and then he hung up the phone. 6 months later, Douglas Hale stood in federal court for sentencing. His skin had gone grey in prison, aged 10 years in half of one. The judge looked at him with the expression of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and was no longer shocked by anything. 40 years in federal prison, the judge said, her voice steady and absolute, for racketeering, bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. No parole eligibility for 25 years. The court finds that your victim suffered greatly at your hands for 8 years and that you abused your position of authority and friendship with law enforcement to ensure she had no recourse for justice. This sentence is just. Douglas collapsed. Actually folded in on himself, weeping, begging, his entire body trembling as federal marshals led him away. It was not a dramatic moment. It was not cinematic. It was simply the sound of a man who had finally understood that he would pay for what he had done. Sofia watched from the gallery. She did not cry. Did not smile. Did not show anything at all. She simply breathed, and for the first time in 8 years, her breathing was free of the weight that had been sitting on her chest since the moment Douglas Hale had first wrapped his hands around her throat and told her that no one would ever believe her. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. The candlelight flickered across Sofia's face as she sat in the private booth at Bella Knot, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on the white linen tablecloth. For months had passed since Douglas Hale was led away in handcuffs, since Margaret Harrington's world collapsed into lawsuits and shame, since the foreclosure notice on Sofia's apartment was shredded and burned. But sitting here across from Luca Castelliano in a restaurant that cost more per plate than she used to spend on groceries for an entire week, she still could not quite believe she was allowed to be here. Not as a maid. Not as someone rescued. As someone chosen. Luca wore a dark suit that had been tailored to fit his broad shoulders perfectly, an open-collar white shirt beneath it, and his dark eyes held something she had never seen directed at her before. Not protection. Not pity. Recognition. The kind of look that said he saw her, truly saw her, not the bruises or the broken pieces, but the woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing with nothing but determination. "You moved out of the mansion," he said, his voice like thunder rolling across still water. 3 weeks ago. To an apartment on Valencia Street. A studio with sunlight in the afternoons and a view of the street below. Sofia's breath caught. "You had me watched." "No." He shook his head, leaning forward slightly. "Enzo mentioned it. He was concerned you did not have security. I told him that if you chose to leave, we would respect that choice completely. But I would be lying if I said I was not relieved when I drove past your building and saw the lights on in the evening. It meant you were safe. It meant you were building something." The waiter appeared with their first course, a risotto so delicate it seemed to melt the moment it touched her tongue, but Sofia barely tasted it. Her focus was entirely on the man across from her, on the careful way he was speaking, as if each word had been weighed and measured. "You have been taking night classes," Luca continued. "Business management. Your professor told you that you had the highest test scores in the class, and you cried in the bathroom afterward because no one had ever told you that you were good at anything before." Sofia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "How do you?" "Because I have people who care about you, Sofia. Not to control you. To know that you are thriving." He set down his fork. "For months ago, you were free from Douglas Hale, but you were still running. Still looking over your shoulder. Still waiting for the other disaster to strike. Why did you stay in the mansion as long as you did if you knew you could leave?" Sofia met his eyes directly. The old version of her would have looked away. The old version would have apologized for being too much trouble, for costing him money and attention. But she was not that version anymore. Because for the first time in 8 years, Sofia said, her voice steady like a candle that would not be blown out, "I was not running away from something. I was choosing to stay near something. Someone. And I needed time to understand the difference." Luca's expression shifted, softened, something breaking open behind his eyes that looked almost like pain. "The night I found you on Highway 101, he said quietly, your car was dead in the cold, and you were trembling so hard you could barely stand. I saw the bruises on your wrists, the way you flinched when my men approached. I saw my mother in you, Sofia. I was 8 years old when I watched my father put his hands on her throat. I was 8 years old when I understood that power exists in this world, and the only moral choice is to use it to protect people like her. Like you." Sofia's throat tightened. She could not speak. But somewhere between that night on the highway and this moment, Luca continued, "It stopped being about a promise I made to a scared child. It became about you. Sofia Morgan, who looked at my daughter Emma and loved her like she was your own blood. Who took the most humiliating job in my household and performed it with dignity. Who rebuilt her entire life from ashes while I watched, and never once asked me to make it easier. Who stood in that courtroom and watched Douglas Hale get 40 years and did not celebrate. Just breathed. Just existed in your freedom without needing to prove it to anyone." He reached across the table, his hand palm up, waiting. "I am asking you to let me stand beside you while you build whatever future you want. Not as your employer. Not as your protector. As someone who loves you." Sofia's hand shook as she reached for his. The moment their skin touched, something that had been locked inside her chest since the moment Douglas first wrapped his hands around her throat released. Not all of it. Some of it would take years. But enough. Enough to breathe. Yes, she whispered. That single word echoed through the restaurant like a bell. 3 days later, Sofia received an envelope in the mail at her apartment. Inside was a university acceptance letter. Luca had applied on her behalf to San Francisco State's 4-year business degree program with a full scholarship funded through his foundation, the legitimate one that now devoted millions annually to helping domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. The application essay had been written by her professor, a letter of recommendation that had taken weeks to craft. Sofia sat on the edge of her bed and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming reality that she was allowed to have a future now. That someone believed in her enough to invest in it. 6 months later, Sofia Morgan stood on the balcony of Luca's mansion, the same spot where she had almost given up 2 years earlier. The October wind cut through the air with the same biting cold, but this time she wore Luca's cashmere coat, wrapped around her like armor, his arm steady around her shoulders. Below them, the city lights flickered like dying stars, like prayers answered in the darkness. She had finished her business degree. She was now managing Luca's charitable foundation, working alongside lawyers and social workers and survivors like herself, distributing millions in aid to women escaping abusive relationships. Emma had started calling her Sofia with the ease of a child who knew she was loved without condition. Margaret Harrington had disappeared into irrelevance, bankrupt and alone, her name no longer spoken in the circles that had once revered her. Douglas Hale was 23 years into his sentence at FCI Victorville, his parole applications denied with the precision of a blade. "Do you ever regret it?" Sofia asked, her voice small against the October wind. "Stepping into my life that night on the highway." Luca turned her to face him, his hand rising to her cheek with a gentleness that still surprised her, that would always surprise her because it had been forbidden in her old life. "I regret every night before that one," he said, "when I did not know you existed." They stood in the cold, watching the city breathe below them, two people who had survived hell in entirely different ways, who had recognized each other's scars, who had chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Not because power had demanded it. Because love had. This story is not about a powerful man saving a helpless woman. It is about two people who understood pain, who chose to transform it into purpose. It is about using power not to dominate but to protect. It is about the courage it takes to let someone see your wounds and trust they will not use them against you. Sofia Morgan walked into a courtroom terrified and alone, and she walked out with her abuser in handcuffs and her future in her own hands. Not because a mafia boss decided her fate, but because she chose to stop running and start fighting. And sometimes, when you are brave enough to ask for help, miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of courage, justice, and unexpected love. Drop a comment telling us what you thought about Sofia's journey. Every single comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating meaningful stories like this one. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.